Welcome classic rock fans to an episode of New Album Review, and today we're looking at the new Foo Fighters album Medicine at Midnight. If you're new to this channel, do click like, subscribe and check that bell so you get notified of any future uploads, and do take a moment to check some of the links below this video for ways you can support me and the work done here at Classic Album Review. The Foo Fighters have been the alt-rock band of choice for a few years now, with Dave Grohl sailing perilously close to becoming a national institution. He may not possess the twisted and fragile glamour of Kurt Cobain, but nevertheless he has dictated the terms for his own success with the Foo Fighters for the last 25 years. And this band do very much exist on their own terms. They may not evoke that angst-ridden, pheromone-infused teen spirit anymore, but the sheer nous, energy and power that defines their stadium shows is certainly apparent. He definitely knows how to command the attention of an audience, and a pretty substantial one at that. The Foo Fighters may have traded that nihilism and spleen associated with the grunge movement, instead preferring a more pure hard rock sound associated with those 1970s classic rock behemoths, rather than the more punk and indie influences that informs the Nirvana sound, of course. Although saying that Medicine at Midnight evidences what can only be described as a pop streak. He cites Bowie's Let's Dance period as an influence here. Some might say, of course, the writing was on the wall when he teamed up with producer Greg Kurstin, a producer who had worked with the likes of Adele and other such pop luminaries. And this aesthetic is very much apparent on this album, and especially on the title track. It's certainly got a fairly funky vibe to it. It at times feels more Saturday Night Fever than Negative Creep. Dave Grohl said the influences for this album are the bands that make those more upbeat, up-tempo records, almost danceable records, he says. And there are times that this album sounds like the bastard progeny of Led Zeppelin and Casey and the Sunshine Band. In fact, Riff magazine were fairly disparaging about this album, if I may quote, "Medicine at Midnight has its requisite moments of cleverness, the unusual smattering of real emotion and big guitar riffs. But Dave, you were in Nirvana, you lived with Kurt Cobain, you made records with Beatles and members of Led Zeppelin. You don't have to be as good as them, but you should also know what musical growth means." Ouch. This is the band's 10th album and it's fairly upbeat to say the least. An excellent article in the Wall Street Journal states how the band have been fairly consistent with their overall sound and not embarrassing themselves like some of their 90s peers. In fact, it says there'd be no ill-advised genre exercises like Weezer, no indulgent multi-disc concept albums like the Smashing Pumpkins. And I think the point being made here is that they've got a fairly consistent sound that operates within set parameters. Although I must admit those parameters, there's plenty of wriggle room there as they've veered and fluctuated from almost from gentle acoustic numbers to more abrasive sound. The band decided to take a break after Concrete and Gold, and when they did resume, they actually started recording in an old haunted house, very reminiscent perhaps of those early Led Zeppelin albums in the early 70s, and this probably contributed to the atmosphere of the recording sessions, as it did for Led Zeppelin. In fact, Led Zeppelin are a band that have been plagued by a troublesome spirit quite recently. In fact, Grohl states of the recording sessions, "I knew the vibes were definitely off, but the sound was on. We would come back the next day to find the guitars had been detuned, the mixing desk had been tampered with, and there were some weird open mic noises. Spooky indeed." Dave Grohl, as I've said, has cited the influence of the David Bowie album Let's Dance. He said he wanted to make a really up and fun record, filled with anthemic, huge sing-along rock songs. It's certainly a move away from that abrasive post-grunge sound to something that feels more pop and gospel infused. So listening to this album, I made the notes about the tracks. I mean, the first track, Making Fire, is an arresting number and really announces itself. It's bright and positive with an excellent guitar riff that really feeds into the whole vibe of the number. And the female backing vocals with their refrain gives it a sunny, toe-tapping, almost, as I've said, a gospel feel to it. I must admit, Grohl sounds absolutely rejuvenated on this album. He says in this song that I've been waiting a lifetime to live. Maybe this album is his barbaric yop. And this song is definitely a walk on the sunnier and funkier side of the street. Also features his daughter Violet, I believe. In fact, Dave Grohl has gone on to say, "Songs like Making Fire rooted in Sly and the Family's stone grooves, but amplified in the way only the Foo Fighters can do it." Of course, he told NME that this is definitely a party record. This is a fascinating number as it blends that 90s alt-rock guitar sound with a distinctive upbeat gospel, almost soul vibe to it. And some critics have been quite disparaging, using adjectives like frothy and ear candy to describe the sounds on this record. but I generally find it quite celebratory and life-affirming, and I particularly like the sound of the cowbell on Cloud Spotter. It's definitely a celebration, a homage even to bands that have pursued a more commercial vibe in an overall rock context. Bands like Queen, perhaps, at times. One can almost detect a Freddie Mercury-like vocal echo in the song Holding Poison. Waiting on War is a well-crafted arena pleaser as well, and should certainly be well received by a huge arena audience. There's no doubt in my mind that this album is as nakedly pop as the Foo Fighters have been and perhaps ever will be. The second track, Shame, Shame, has a distinctive R&B feel to it. With its opening drum sounds and hand claps, I think Grohl is definitely tapping into his inner Bee Gee here. His vocals have a strained, not quite pants-splitting register, but fairly high for him. Nate Mendel's bass lines are absolutely fabulous on this number, not to mention Taylor Hawkins' drumming as well, rather than that hard, abrasive backbeat that he would usually provide with a Foo Fighters album with. You get a lot of nuanced cymbal work and hi-hat flourishes. In fact, one critic has written of this number that it is a moody and spacious bass-led song that brings to mind the angular groove of U2 circa Achtung Baby. As regards to production, the pop aesthetic is very much apparent, as I sometimes feel that the guitars are a little bit too low in the mix. No Son of Mine, which is a heavier number on this album, of course is actually a tribute to Lemmy. There's actually a motif in this song that reminds me a little bit of Ace of Spades, and you can imagine a real festival crowd getting behind this one. Cloud Spotter has something with the Hendrix about it in its carefully constructed riff. I think even alludes to Purple Haze in the lyric, refuse me while I kiss the sky. Although I have to say that his vocal performance on this number feels a little bit restrained. Holding the Poison sounds like a vintage Foo Fighters number. It's effective and affecting, especially with its use of layered vocals and great chorus. Chasing Birds is the penultimate number and has an exquisite fragility to it. I love the line, "The road to hell is paved for good intentions," croons Grohl. It is, as I said, it's a delicate number that does veer dangerously close to ballad territory, but thankfully manages to circumnavigate any schmaltzy stuff. Love Dies Young is an immense number with an incredible guitar line. It's one of those songs you really want to crank up the volume for. Overall, after a couple of listens, I have to say there will be a lot of Foo Fighters fans that will consider the sound perhaps a bit of a misfire. But I suspect it will become more appealing with each subsequent listen. As an album, I find it a focused affair. If I may quote the Wall Street Journal again, it playfully bumps against the self-imposed limitation of the group's sound, even if it never quite reaches outside those boundaries. And this is how I feel about this record myself. It ping-pongs within the set parameters of a Foo Fighters record, whilst there is a discernible lean, not necessarily towards the brothers Gibb, but certainly Sly and the Family Stone. I don't know if this will ever be considered a world-class Foo Fighters album. Only time will tell that, I suspect. I, for one, don't rank it up there with their best works, but I have found it a thoroughly enjoyable and engaging listen. Anyway, you've been watching an episode of New Album Review. If you enjoyed this, please do share it. Other than that, I urge you to keep warm, stay safe, but more importantly, please do keep listening.